The world is broken. You don't believe me? Why can one country seize another country's leader and put them on trial for violating the laws of the kidnapping country? Why can a state declare another illegitimate based on a map drawn centuries ago, then butcher civilians and burn cities without the world caring? Why can a child born in one place be guaranteed a high quality of life while another struggles for food to live? Why can two people do the same work with the same effort, but one earns 90% less simply because of where they were born? It is broken, and do not let anyone convince you otherwise. It always has been. There have been countless movements that promised a perfect world if everyone simply believed the same things. All of them were incomplete. Put two people in a room and conflict will emerge regardless of belief. Christian with Christian, communist with communist, any ideology with itself. Humans are filled with contradictions, no matter how sincere their good intentions. There are no human solutions to the darkness in the hearts of people, but for 99% of people needlessly suffering, it doesn't have to be this way. At least not as terrible as things are, because much of the suffering is manufactured, a problem of structure. So what is the solution? First, it is understanding that the root cause of global extreme inequality is not beliefs or ideologies, but structure, and that it therefore requires a structural solution. The Charter does not propose another revolutionary system or claim democracy is the answer, or a new set of beliefs that claims to solve everything if universally adopted. Nor does it seek to replace what currently exists. It seeks to evolve it. The fundamental structural issue is that the nation-state system is missing a stabilization mechanism. The Charter does not promise a good life for everyone. It proposes a self-regulating structure that places a floor under how bad things can get, based on 3 axioms: knowledge for everyone, freedom of movement, and exile over execution. Knowledge for everyone addresses the structural problem of information asymmetry. Freedom of movement does not mean open borders everywhere, but it does ensure there is always a place for people a system no longer wants. Exile over execution removes the incentive for political violence. 3 simple axioms address the structural forces driving the widening gap between the 1% and the rest of the world. They do this by redefining sovereignty. Sovereignty is not rooted in lines on a map or recognition by other states, but in the people who live under a system's rules. When sovereignty is treated this way, much of the misery experienced by the exploited 99% is revealed as manufactured rather than inevitable. Every life is intrinsically valuable and sovereign, and states must operate in a world where sovereignty begins with people, not borders based on recognition by other states. Stabilization. All states throughout history have experienced stress and periods of destabilization, regardless of culture or geography. The Roman state evolved over time in response to both internal and external pressures. The same pattern held for the Maurya, the Ming, and the Buganda. Stress enters from outside through war, climate disruption, pandemics, and trade shocks. It also builds internally through demographic change, inequality, corruption, elite capture, and institutional aging. The difference between systems that survive stress and systems that collapse is not moral quality or political form. It is whether a state has the means to stabilize. The current globalized political structure of Westphalian nation-states contains 2 fatal structural flaws. The first is the myth that political states map neatly onto geographic nations. The second is the assumption that sovereignty is established by other states rather than by the people who live within them. As a result, nation-states become tinderboxes as stress accumulates. There has never been a culturally homogeneous state in human history, except through extreme violence or systematic coercion. Every political system contains a minority, either inherently or produced through the iron law of oligarchy. This socially volatile reality is forced into a framework that assumes fixed borders, permanent membership, and absolute territorial sovereignty. When stress rises, states respond by privileging certain portions of their society or by pushing out undesirables who have nowhere to go. What follows is not always open warfare. More often it is mass death through immobility. People are sealed into failing states and left to die slowly and bureaucratically, either neglected within collapsing states or trapped indefinitely in refugee camps in the region. The global response is containment through the construction of walls. States admit a token number of refugees and outsource the remainder to international institutions that are underfunded, politically constrained, and incapable of supporting what is often permanent displacement. Camps become long-term settlements without rights, markets, or futures. Mortality becomes normalized. Neighboring regions destabilize as failed states continue to be recognized out of fear of balkanization. The state remains formally intact while its accumulating failures are ignored. This is historically abnormal state failure. For most of human history, cities acted as stabilizing mechanisms. City-states and free regions thrived on diversity. They absorbed people others did not want. They enforced rules strictly, allowed trade freely, and made exit easy. They did not require cultural unity, ideological alignment, or permanent loyalty. Belonging was conditional and transactional. If you worked and followed the rules, you stayed. If you could not, you left. These cities were never homogeneous. They did not try to be. Diversity was built into the design of law, markets, and movement. When trade was allowed to flow, they grew explosively. When trade was throttled, they stagnated. New Amsterdam's rise began when commercial restrictions collapsed and continued because local practice remained permissive, even as sovereignty changed. The flag mattered less than the freedom to exchange until it became New York. The same pattern held for Venice, Quanzhou, Zanzibar, and Dhaka. Diversity was the feature, not the bug. Having places that could absorb unwanted people stabilized entire regions, because mass murder curses both the victim and the oppressor. This is how humans have lived for as long as there have been humans. The European imposition of the Westphalian concept of the nation-state inverted this logic. It treated immobility as stability and homogeneity as strength. But homogeneity was never real. No state in history has ever been culturally or ethnically uniform without genocide, ethnic cleansing, forced assimilation, or administrative erasure. What appears as unity is always manufactured through violence or relabeling. States built on that assumption are brittle because they deny a permanent reality. Pluralism is not an anomaly. It is the norm. Opportunity. As long as populations were young and growth was abundant, this brittleness remained hidden. That era is ending. By the 2040s, nearly all societies will have completed the first demographic transition, and the era of cheap labour will be over as global population peaks. The economic beneficiaries of the next 40 years of growth as the world ages will be countries with young working cohorts such as Venezuela, Iraq, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Indonesia. Taken together, these societies now occupy the same demographic position China held from the 1990s through the 2020s, with large working-age populations. As China once did, these cohorts have an opportunity to demand structural change. However, a China-style economic boom is not guaranteed. India and China were positioned similarly in the 1980s and 1990s, yet China boomed while India languished and now faces a potentially harsher, demographically driven economic crash. India's fertility rate continues to collapse at a far lower level of economic development. Escaping the middle-income trap before fertility rates fall depends on whether a state recognizes its opportunity and resists developing a belief in exceptionalism. A false belief in exceptionalism has prevented China and India from escaping the middle income trap, just as their populations are set to contract over the next decade. States that do succeed in escaping the middle income trap, such as Chile or South Korea, do so because they recognize they have a narrow window to take advantage of a young and growing working population and resist the belief that economic booms stem from the inherent superiority of a political party or system. What is structurally unique about the current young working cohorts over the next 10 years is that they represent the final large labour wave before the world reaches peak invested capital, the point at which global population growth levels off and investment shifts from expansion toward maintenance. The second demographic transition, the shift from peak population toward stability and decline, has already begun in Europe, the United States, Japan, South Korea, and Russia. As large post-war cohorts age and pass away, populations contract and fiscal pressure rises as fewer workers remain to support shrinking tax bases. Among these transitions, the most dangerous is China. The retiree wave there is already locked in by arithmetic alone, and its inability to manage the coming contraction will have destabilizing effects far beyond its borders. No amount of automation or artificial intelligence can fully offset this reality. China will not escape the middle-income trap through productivity gains alone. Even widespread automation and access to advanced AI systems cannot compensate for a missing generation of workers. There is a theoretical path to escape this constraint, but it is politically unpalatable, and it is not democracy. Even without riots or collapse, a prolonged demographic recession at this scale will disrupt the world through supply chains, capital flows, and geopolitics. The danger will not be dramatic, like a receding glacier or rising sea levels. It will be persistent, cumulative, and unavoidable. Early signs are already visible in rising illegal Chinese migration through places such as Myanmar, Indonesia, the Philippines, Uganda, and Tanzania. A trickle will rapidly accelerate into a flood, particularly into Russia's Far East, as the tax burden of remaining in China continues to rise. As fear spreads, states will respond predictably. Capital controls will tighten first. Movement will be restricted next. Digital money will turn these controls into infrastructure rather than policy. Wealth will become harder to move, and exit will become permissioned. The attempt to leave, not the act itself, will be criminalized through a million small steps. Every life is sovereign. The worst effects of the inevitable global destabilization caused by China's demographic contraction can be mitigated only if the nation-state system's structural lack of a stabilization mechanism is addressed. The Charter does not overthrow states, redraw borders, or impose democracy. Authoritarian regimes may persist. Theocracies may persist. People may choose systems others find abhorrent. The Charter rejects the idea that every society must converge into a European-style democracy. It insists on only one constraint. No system may enforce permanent membership through violence. This principle is expressed through 3 axioms. Knowledge for everyone ensures that the information required to maintain a minimum standard of living is freely available and grounded in local materials and conditions. Freedom of movement does not mean that all borders are open. It means that strategic free cities or states exist where movement is guaranteed between charter partners and where security is comprehensively enforced. Exile over execution ensures that even the worst regimes can exist only with populations that remain voluntarily. Political execution, whether immediate or through prolonged imprisonment, is prohibited as a tool of coercion with enforced autarky by charter partners as the consequence. Together, these 3 mechanisms form a self-regulating pressure release for the global system. The Charter is not utopian because it is not based on belief, but on structure. It does not promise prosperity, but it does establish a flaw by ensuring that hundreds of millions of people who would otherwise suffer needlessly, face execution or remain trapped, retain the ability to live, move, and choose. The structure matters, but it can function only if we accept a single moral constraint that every life matters, and therefore every life is sovereign. Chih-Wei Lin and Lina Barrakat.
Author's note. Thank you for listening to this background video on Mina's Star. This series will provide detailed background on how the novel's systems work, as well as the perspective of its characters, starting with the Charter. This novel began as a response to two troubling global trends. The first is the growing comfort with nuclear appeasement. The second is the steady rise of global political violence. Through this story, I wanted to explore the dangers of both, while offering a possible path forward through the idea of the Charter, a political framework built to redefine what a state can be. If you have listened this far, thank you. Please consider liking or subscribing to help this story and its message reach more people.